Hi, I'm Lindsay Longhurst and welcome to Cybernet. If there's one company that has been key in the growth of the video games industry and the rise of their popularity, without a doubt we're talking about Nintendo. They've been present in the industry for over 40 years and they've always made the headlines, sometimes for good and on other occasions not so good. A great part of their success not only depends on their catalogue of games with exclusive characters that are now icons of the industry, their philosophy as a company has also been important. They have a way of thinking that has taken them to the top of the industry, although they've also been part of some controversy over the years. They were not the first to take the fun of video games to our homes, but thanks to an entrepreneurial vision, they were able to change an industry that was heading for failure, paving the way for what we all know today, that video games are the most popular entertainment media in the world, overtaking the combined revenue of industries like movies, television, and music. We all know Nintendo's history of how they started as a company that made Japanese Hanafuda cards at the end of the 19th century. And then they made the transition to making toys in the second half of the 20th century. Being a company that was founded by the same family, honor and professionalism have been important to them from the start. Their vision was to bring products that, apart from being interactive, could help broaden their consumers' imagination. That's the reason why, when they started to ship their first electronic toys and home consoles, they wanted to be different from everything that was on the market. For example, when they launched their first console in America, it was bundled with other accessories, like the Zapper electric gun or with Rob the interactive robot. With that, consumers would identify Nintendo as a company like no other. We also learned from that era that they had an aggressive business mentality, avoiding saturation of the market by limiting the publishers with the number of games that they could release each year. And of course, while this didn't prevent bad games, at least it helped them maintain their status as leaders of the industry. Over the next decades, Nintendo's major innovations were based on presenting hardware that was easy to use in our living rooms and on the go with portable consoles. And just when we all thought that the company was stagnant, they revolutionized the industry once again with Wii's motion controllers. With this console, they made us all remember that there's no specific age to enjoy video games, being as popular with kids as with adults. Nevertheless, with Wii U's launch, they hit a new low, derived from a bad marketing campaign, a less powerful console than others, and an unattractive catalogue of games. Some even thought the Nintendo had reached its end, but it was then that their former president, Satoru Iwata, suggested that they needed to set their sights on new horizons, presenting their characters from other angles. At that moment, we were unaware, but they started to build the basis of what we all know today. They started with the Amiibo, and like it or not, fans loved the idea of having official figures based on popular characters on their shelves. Their functionality is still being debated, but new ones keep coming out each year. They went back to their origins with the launch of the NES and SNES Classic Edition consoles, which were filled with nostalgia. They released their IPs to clothing and toy companies so they could work with their characters, just like the Lego sets that have interactive functions, or with the Mario Kart remote-controlled vehicles. And thanks to the Switch console, they're back at the top of sales every month around the world. But they're not limiting themselves to publishing only games, just like we saw with the experimental Labo products, which at first glance sounds like they have a simple concept. But we discovered that inside these boxes, made out of cartons, they're full of creativity. Or how about the Ring-Con controller, which makes exercising at home fun and entertaining? Pretty cool. The thing that excites us in the future is being able to visit one of their theme parks called Super Nintendo World, where apart from having attractions based on their most famous games, we can also taste food inspired by classic characters like the Mario hamburger, the superstar popcorn, or the shell-shaped calzone pasta. Delicious! And coming soon, Mario will finally make his return to the big screen with an animated movie that has nothing to do with the horrible 1993 live-action film. They surely learned a hard lesson with that movie.
Alien species escaping.
And make it safely back.
Later, alligator.
All of this seems to be only the beginning for Nintendo, and I'm really excited to find out what they're planning next. Whether it's video games, toys, theme parks, or movies, we still have much to discover from Nintendo. It's time to remember those characters we miss in video games. They had successful games in the past, but it seems like they've now been forgotten. At number 10, we find the explosive duo of Jak and Daxter. Although they've been gone for over a decade, we believe that this franchise created by Naughty Dog still has a lot of potential. Number 9, another colourful character that's been forgotten is the stealthy Sly Cooper. Or maybe he's hidden so well that nobody can find him. At number 8, we have Glover. He's the protagonist of a hidden gem that dates back to the Nintendo 64 and the first PlayStation. With the number 7 spot, we use the power of the Sands of Time to invoke the Prince of Persia. His recently remastered game could be the first step in his triumphal comeback. If Mega Man has had an acceptable comeback with new games, then why haven't we seen a new game of Mega Man X? There wouldn't be any Robot Master that could stop him. That's why he's number 6 on our list. The number 5 spot is reserved for a ninja that's lurked in the shadows for a long time. He's Ryu Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden. The new generation of players should try out its hardcore difficulty. We know that's practically impossible, but if Gordon Freeman was back, it would be a historic day in gaming because it would mean that Half-Life 3 would be on its way. Well, you gotta let a girl dream once in a while, right? We love Kirby, but Lolo is another creation by HAL Laboratory that we've waited for years, around 30 of them to be exact. He's spotted at number 3 on our list. Sam Fisher has had some cameos here and there, but it's about time that he received a new Splinter Cell game, don't you agree? That's why he has a very well-deserved second place on our list. But it's the fun and crazy Banjo and Kazooie who are the ones to take home our number 1 pick for today. We're hoping that they can soon break Gruntilda's spell with a new game. Talking about lost heroes and the company Rare, just when we thought that we would never hear about Joanna Dark again, the protagonist of the Perfect Dark series, Microsoft surprised us all when they announced that they were working on a new game. For those who don't remember, Perfect Dark is considered a cult game that came out in the year 2000 for the Nintendo 64. It was the second action game that was made at Rare after the successful GoldenEye 007. And just like James Bond's previous adventure, it had a gameplay like no other first-person shooter game had, where eliminating all of the enemies was not enough. You also had to complete different objectives in each level. But everything changed for this franchise when the studio was sold to Microsoft, especially with the terrible release of Perfect Dark Zero for Xbox 360. That game was so bad that we prefer to wipe it from our memories. The next game will be a complete reboot of the series, so we'll probably get to know Joanna Dark's origin story. The game is being developed by a new Xbox studio called The Initiative, which has very creative people who've previously worked on games like Tomb Raider, Sunset Overdrive, Red Dead Redemption, and even on God of War. That's just one more reason why we're all excited to play the new Perfect Dark. Gaming online is pretty common nowadays. All you need is to connect your PC or console to the internet, so you can play matches online with your friends or with people around the world in real time. Although on consoles you need to have a membership to be able to connect, but that's a topic for another day. You can even play thousands of games right on your smartphone. The popularity of online games has been increasing constantly throughout video games history. In fact, playing a game that does not have online multiplayer functions is weird nowadays. We've seen how online games have been evolving at the same pace as communication technologies. And even though online games started to increase the number of players at the beginning of this century, you may be surprised to hear that they've been around since the beginning of the industry. The first games in history allowed two players to interact on the same screen, sometimes on the same session, or taking turns to compare scores. When the first computers that were used in universities in the United States started to share servers on their campuses, the students wasted no time finding a way to play with other students that were in other buildings. This is how the first multiplayer games started. They were based on text adventures or in primitive combat simulators like Maze War from 1974. Island of Kesmai is considered the first commercial online game for PC. It was a role-playing game with procedural levels, and you needed to pay $12 an hour to be able to play it online. So don't be whining about the modern cost of similar services. At the end of the 80s, more online games started to come out, such as Air Warrior for PC, and even the Famicom console had an adapter to play simple games in Japan. On the other hand, Sega launched a service called MegaNet in Japan during the year 1990 that had a handful of titles for 2 or more players. It wasn't until the mid-90s when interest in online games started to grow. Doom is not only considered the father of first-person shooters, but it also allowed playing online or by LAN connections in deathmatch-style sessions, which form the basis of any competitive shooter, even today. Following in Doom's steps, more games from different genres started to include online functions, such as StarCraft, Quake World, Ultima Online, Counter-Strike, and EverQuest, just to mention a few. But online games started to appeal to broader and bigger audiences, with the first consoles of the century, like Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, and the original Xbox. These consoles required adapters because only a few games were able to connect via a modem. This is also when headsets started to be used, so you could voice chat with other players. World of Warcraft was one of the first games that based its success entirely on an online experience. In 2008, it reached the 10 million player mark, and it's still one of the most popular online games today. Since then, it became common to use online features in games. Even titles that were primarily focused on single-player campaigns started to include multiplayer modes to take advantage of the popularity of online services. Up until a few years ago, it caused controversy when a game was launched without a story campaign, saving the developers a lot of money while in production. Online games played an important role in the creation of amateur competitive leagues that have evolved over time into professional esports tournaments and leagues. We've even been witnesses of the creation of new genres, like the massive online role-playing games or the popular battle royales. The cool thing about playing online is the fact that you never know how another person is going to react or play. A new session will never be like the one before, and anything can happen in it. You can also enjoy those moments with your friends and meet people from other countries with the same interests as you. It's a great socializing tool for new generations, and it breaks frontiers.
Thanks for that.
Game developers will continue to experiment with new online modes in the future that promise more immersive experiences. So all we can do is take advantage of it and enjoy playing online on our favorite games. I'll see you online, my friends. The video game industry is the most profitable in entertainment. Only in recent years they raised more money than other industries like movies, television, music and sports combined. Thanks to their popularity, there are many video games that have been involved in controversies. We know very well cases of censorship because of violence in games like Manhunt, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, Doom, Mortal Kombat, and an extensive list of titles that I'm sure you all know well. Or there have been cases like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas that included highly sexualized content that raised alarms all over the world. But today we'll talk about special cases where the gamers have been the ones to raise their voices when something wasn't quite right, because the product was deficient or because the final game was not what had been promised. We start with a case that still feels fresh, the launch of Cyberpunk 2077. Since its first teaser that was released in 2013, the studio, CD Projekt Red, hyped us all with a game that promised to be spectacular. But when it finally came out, after several delays in 2020, they broke all of our hearts with its multiple technical flaws in its version for consoles. Not even the PC version could be saved. We now know that this happened because the game only had a couple of years of development, and that the investors pressured the studio to launch the game early. We have to remember that CD Projekt Red is not a big studio like others, and that they've been busy with The Witcher 3 and its expansions. Let's hope that other studios have learned a lesson from this, don't you think? Similar cases happened in last-generation consoles with much bigger companies. Yes, I'm talking about you, Electronic Arts and Ubisoft. Specifically in games such as Mass Effect, Andromeda and Assassin's Creed Unity. When these games came out, they became memes of the industry, derived from their multiple bugs and glitches. It took several weeks to fix them with updates, which is another sin that most companies are guilty of. And now that we've mentioned Mass Effect, do you remember the controversy about how the original trilogy ended? Millions of players had invested dozens of hours in this series, but hated its ambiguous and depressing ending. This led to BioWare having to launch another ending via DLC to calm the fans. Another studio that promised too much and delivered too little were the developers of No Man's Sky. For several years, we were amazed by planets full of wildlife in their trailers, and also they promised encounters with other players in space. But Hello Games' ambition was such that they launched a very different game, where we could only see empty planets. Fortunately, we can now enjoy the game in its best version, even though we had to wait a couple of years filled with updates. What a shame. If there's something that we hate as consumers, it's having to pay additional fees when we've already paid full price for a game. That's why fans are still mad with the launch of Star Wars Battlefront 2, where the now infamous microtransactions were a part of the gameplay, giving an advantage to players that spent more money over the ones who just ground their way up for more hours. Electronic Arts were able to resolve the problem quickly, but its stain will remain with them forever. And another weird case was Street Fighter X Tekken. Everything seemed to be perfect until fans discovered that the additional fighters that were being sold separately were already inside the disc they bought. That meant that you had to pay for unlocking them from your own disc. At least in Capcom, they learned the lesson and, well, that's not quite true. With the launch of Street Fighter V, they also made fans angry having fewer characters and with no single-player campaign. What other cases like these ones do you remember? After all, this beloved industry wouldn't be the same without all of the controversies. And that's a wrap. Don't miss our next episode for more special features about the gaming industry. I'm Lucy Longhurst. Catch you later.